All right, eyeballs. 3, 2, 1, 0. So, this is. Does everyone have the Google Slides presentation up? It should look like my screen. It should be a lovely blue and yellow presentation with the title Genocide.
How do you use your computer?
Yeah, you can watch that. It's fine. Okay.
Is this like the intro to like?
Does anyone not have this up yet?
Me. Hold on.
So I'm gonna talk a little bit about this. So we are going into the novel Night. Leanna put it away, or I'll take it. Okay. That's our last thing we're doing in this class. So we are reading Night as a class. Okay. We're gonna dive into basically a little bit of the Holocaust and the importance of being an eyewitness to history. Okay. But the one thing we need to talk about is genocide, because your final research project and presentation is going to be analyzing another genocide in history and how that connects to literature. Okay, so for example, in Night, all right, that was a genocide, right? That experience was reflected in literature. Oftentimes, history is told in different ways, in poems, short stories, novels. Okay, you're going to do your own research and find how that is true and reflected in a different genocide. I have a book when we get into it for later. If you guys choose the Cambodian genocide, I have a book you can utilize for that presentation. You have to read it, but you can pull stuff from it. So let me know. Yeah.
We did genocide in history.
Mm-hmm. We're kind of working together to kind of help you guys with this. Okay. So you guys have the background information. I'm gonna probably get a little bit deeper with it because we're spending a whole day on it. So please stay on topic. If you see your neighbor not on the PowerPoint, please make sure that you direct them back. Also, you guys are doing hearing tests today. She's going to be in the back room, so if you did not get your hearing test done, if you already did, you're fine. She's going to pull you in. Hi, are you going to sit up in the back room? I am. Okay, perfect. They know, so just come in and grab them one by one. All right, go to the next slide. So we're going to do an anticipation guide. I'm going to hand those out, okay? Basically, I want to know what you guys know so far. So what did you learn from Mr. Wold? What do you think you know? Nate, that's not what I want to hear! Okay, ignore the back. This is what you need to be doing right now. Okay, got it? Got it? It's world history. What is world history? This topic, and I've cried so many times.
Going downhill, dude.
I know.
Today, I had one of my
I feel like the theme of this year is like yeah.
Because what is history?
I don't know.
History is words and conquering.
Graham, pretty soon you're going to have to be
Brayden, come up squad somewhere. All right.
Why is there so many MLAs? Why is there so much?
All right. Okay. You are either writing true or false in the blank. Okay. So for example, number 1 says genocide only occurs when people are killed.
No, pretty sure it's true.
Ryan, Justin, you should be writing, not talking. Do you need a pencil?
Yes, please.
Go to the front. It's kind of full box.
So if we get these wrong, we'll get more.
No. This is.
We just skip it.
No, just put true or false. Make a guess.
But
It's not going to be marked on the front.
yeah, but this doesn't show me now. Yes. Exactly. Is number 2 correct? Alright, thanks.
just put what you guess. Don't you don't? I'm just seeing what you know about it. Dispersing means like sharing. Yeah, sharing or spreading. Okay. Yes. I think that these are not going to be around this very long.
No, no, it's not.
All right. Who do you need first? You're up, buddy. Go do some pouring. Open up those ears.
You need to quit.
Yeah, that's true.
Hannah Frost.
Yeah, you are.
Oh, she's singer.
And Polo.
Yeah, that's me.
That's you, buddy. All right. Okay. Quiet. Quiet. Number 1. Genocide only occurs when people are killed. Janessa, what'd you put? That's actually false. Okay, even the intent to commit genocide can be charged as genocide. You can, yeah, or just put it wrong. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to mark you wrong.
I don't like. Do you want to know? Like,
You're good. Okay. Number 2, Noah, what'd you put? Colonialism began to weaken after World War II when many nations in Africa and Asia started to move towards independence.
True.
That's true. That was the era of decolonization. Remember, guys? That's when the nationalist parties started to move countries that were in Europe out of areas like Africa and other areas that have been colonized. Okay. Number 3. Yeah.
No doubt of that. They just made situations worse in countries because they didn't pay attention to past, like, tribal, for example, a lot of parts of Africa, they were genocides committed just because of these European countries failed to do the background research and say that these two communities don't get along. Probably shouldn't leave them in the same borders. And then also same for India and Pakistan. They would have cleaned that up.
It's also similar to the United States with Native Americans, right?
Yeah.
Happens a lot. Number 3, let's go with Nate Hubbard. The national boundaries that exist in Africa today did not exist prior to colonialism. It's partly true. It's actually true because different countries have been renamed since then, and different boundaries have been drawn. Okay. Number 4, let's go with Erica. Racial discrimination and racial hatred can lead to both genocide and apartheid. True. Okay. Number 5, Haley. The United Nations is an international organization designed to maintain the peace and security of the world. True. Okay. The UN, the United Nations, they are basically the organization that oversees the International Criminal Court. So they're the ones that would prosecute genocide. Number 6, propaganda is a helpful tool in dispersing the truth. Isaiah? False. Because propaganda is accurate, yes or no?
Nope.
It's a manipulation tactic, okay? How do you think Hitler got a lot of Germany to kind of come to his side? Do you think they were born that evil?
No.
Not necessarily.
Propaganda could also be, U.S. did
A lot of propaganda in World War I and World War II, yes.
especially like the famous, like, I want you to fight.
Yes, Uncle Sam.
Uncle Sam.
Number 7, let's go with Samantha. Speaking of Sam, the Holocaust was the first example of genocide. False. Genocides go back to like BC times. Number 8, the U.S. has a legal obligation to intervene if genocide is occurring anywhere in the world. Brayden? True. They are a part of the United Nations, right? So technically, we have some sort of intervention. Who do you need now?
I need Hubbard, Jolin, and Moon.
Go, kiddos. Jess, you're here.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Why don't they intervene to genocide that's happening in Africa now?
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about
Or
it.
in
Okay.
China.
So, or anywhere else in the world.
True.
9. Alex Christasia. International criminal tribunals are courts that can prosecute criminals anywhere in the world for any serious crime.
Probably true.
So so this statement's kind of true, but it's kind of false at the same time because there are specific things they can prosecute for. So when it says any serious crime, that's not necessarily true. There's a very specific list of things that they can prosecute for. Okay? I don't care, either works.
I put false, but then I said true, so I got the
Yeah, you got it right either way.
I put the right.
But the International Criminal Court is the overseeing prosecutorial entity that will deal with things like genocide, human rights violations, things like that. Lastly, 10. Let's go with Lily. Refugees are people who leave their nation to live in another nation for any reason.
False is not any reason.
Yes, a refugee is someone who leaves their native country because their life is in danger. There is a threat to them. Okay, that's why right now we have such an issue with the border because we're having a hard time identifying who's a refugee versus who's just immigrating, right? Because there's so much stuff going on in the world that it's hard to find enough space for everyone that needs help. Okay, so did we learn something? How do we feel? Was it 1 to 10? I want to know. 10 being like I knew all of these, I'm good. 1 being like I didn't know any of these. How many did you get?
100%.
Nice. So do we have the background from history? Do we have the background from history? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. All right, go to the next slide, please.
Whoa.
All right, can I have a volunteer read this quote?
I got it.
On the next slide, can I have a volunteer read this quote? Go ahead, Cole. Follow along.
It was to be one of the bloodiest days of the 20th century. In a highly organized campaign, families were killed as they fled their homes. People were hunted down and slaughtered. Women were murdered as they were giving birth. Thousands of men, women, and children were herded into a stadium where they were mowed down by soldiers, machine gun fire, and hand grenades. Corpses were pushed by the thousands into large burial pits. Within 4 months, nearly 1 million people were murdered simply because of their ethnic origin.
What do you think this quote is talking about? Someone tell me. What do you think this situation is? This point in history, what was this? Anybody? Yeah?
Probably something that happened in Africa because, like, when you think about the most common genocide to think about is like the Holocaust, but that was a lot more organized and there was a lot. It didn't necessarily happen as people were going homes. It happened in the concentration camps. A lot of the times in the groups fighting in Africa, they were just full out and go and military. They would send the military to
They're still organized.
yeah, it's
Hold
organized,
on.
but it's not.
So what else do you need?
Okay, this is the last group. I need Schroeder, Winger, and Woodworth.
Bye. Okay, so Ryan thinks it's somewhere in Africa. Juliana says the Holocaust. Anyone else? What do you think this is from? The Cambodian genocide, maybe? Okay.
Well, it talks about them pushing them. Well, and like in one of the videos that we watched, it talks about people like in their villages running from their homes and then being just shot down in their pits.
Okay.
The bullet, the what was it called?
Holocaust by bullets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, like sometimes they would say that like the ghetto was liquefied or what?
Liquidated.
Liquidated, and so like that's what they would do. They literally just go through all
Literally empty the
and
ghetto.
just shoot everything down.
Kiara?
What is the 20th century?
1900s. So whenever you're talking about like the 19th century, they like to confuse it. They're talking about the 1800s, or they're talking about the 20th century. So we're in the 21st century right now. It's the 2000s.
Oh.
Okay, confusing. Yes. So here's the deal. Okay, when was the Holocaust? When did it occur? 1940s, early 1940s. Okay. This genocide that this quote is talking about happened in Rwanda. Okay, that was 1994.
That's what I thought. I was like, that's
what
what I was thinking.
Right.
It was one of the deadliest genocides in history, and the fact that after the Holocaust, right, after 6 million Jews and 6 million other undesirables were killed, we still have these massive genocides where this is happening, and it's happening today. The Rohingya in Myanmar, which you could choose if you want to do in your genocide project, they're being completely slaughtered to the point where you can read about it in different magazines, but it's absolutely terrible. So one thing I wanted to point out, look at the first bullet point. 170 million people were killed by governments or political violence in the 20th century. So in the 1900s, 170 million people weren't just killed. They were killed in an organized fashion by the government or other political violence. Okay? The second bullet point, 49 million of them occurred in genocides that have been labeled genocides. 49 million people. So when you guys are talking about sophomore year, it's kind of sad. The theme is very like inhumane. Okay? Does that kind of give you a reason of what's happened in history? 49 million people killed to genocides. All right, that kind of gives you the understanding of why this is such a sad topic. Samantha? So those are other people that have been killed in non-labeled genocides. So whatever historians have not identified as an actual genocide, but have been slaughtered in some sort of political violence. Yes.
Not to mention that there is more deaths in genocides than there is in war, and the deaths in war.
Well, I mean, 49 million, right, in 100 years? I don't think there's been a war World War I might have come close.
War and World War II, so
Yeah.
those wars combined.
Yeah. And that's not including those deaths. All right, go to the next slide, please. Okay, the term genocide. You guys know this from history, I'm assuming. The term genocide, okay, that type of horror described in that previous slide, that became known as genocide following the Nazi extermination of 6 million Jews and 6 million other undesirables during the Holocaust. Okay, by undesirables, they didn't just slaughter Jews, they slaughtered anyone who they didn't want to keep in basically the gene pool. So anyone that had a disability, anyone who they deemed unfit. Okay, Hitler was a really fun guy. According to this, right, he just slaughtered anyone who he didn't deem fit or seem that was desirable in his eyes. Okay, so 12 million people were slaughtered in this genocide. So after World War II ended, they held a convention in 1948 called the Genocide Convention. And this is when they actually labeled this type of violence, this sort of organized group. So if you guys click the arrow one more time, we'll go to defining genocide. Okay, so this is how it is defined according to the 1948 convention. Here's something that's really interesting. The adoption of this convention hasn't been adjusted since 1948. So in more than 50 years, we have not gone back and included different types of war crimes that would be included in genocide. Grant, sit up. Okay. Does anyone want to read this? The definition of genocide? Kiara, go ahead.
Defining genocide. A coordinated plan to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group by killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm, inflicting conditions designed to bring about its destruction, preventing births within the group, or removing children from the group.
Okay, a couple things that stand out. So, one, it's not just a race of people, it could be an ethnic group, okay, which happened in Rwanda, right? They tried to kill a specific ethnic group within the main population. The Jews was a religious group, okay, that dealt with the genocide. There's also, right now, LGBTQ people in areas like Russia. They call it a gendercide, okay? There's all these different things, and one thing that is also included is preventing births within the group, okay, and taking children. So in those situations, do you guys understand that they're trying to deplete oh my gosh. They're trying to deplete the opportunity for growth in that group. If you take away the birth, take away the children, they cannot grow, right? Samantha?
The Chinese, they were, I don't know if it's still a thing.
Gendercide with girls, baby girls, right?
Yeah, they were only allowed to have 2 children.
Yes, they used to only have one child, and they all wanted a boy. So there were about 7 million missing girls. What happened to those baby girls? Okay?
That isn't considered. We don't consider that genocide.
They call it gendercide.
I thought that was like.
It's one of those things that the International Criminal Courts still hasn't dealt with, right? Is that a human rights violation? They haven't gone to it yet. They haven't dealt with it. All right, click the next arrow. Okay. So you have 3 bullet points. Number 1 says, there was no term to describe the organized destruction of an entire group until 1948, and here's why. Okay? So it's usually done by a government, but it could be any sort of organized group. Okay? So if I go on a rampage and kill someone, okay? Just saying, I am held responsible by the county or the state, right? I'm going to be prosecuted for murder. Okay? If an entire country, an entire government starts to slaughter one group of people, who holds them responsible? Does that make sense? So in the situation with Nazi Germany, okay, you can't just be like, okay, government, we're prosecuting you. That doesn't make sense. So they had to establish some sort of criminal court, which was the International Criminal Court in the United Nations, to hold them responsible. Okay, so the International Criminal Court deals with things such as rape. They deal with things such as organized terror, torture, human rights violations, okay? So there's this huge entity that will charge someone responsible. So like the leader in Rwanda, which is terrible. I can't even describe to you guys how bad it was. They would broadcast things. They would publish newspapers and like say where they were hiding because they would like try to get the public to join in on this mass slaughter. So they would like broadcast radio waves saying where they were and things like that. So that particular leader was held responsible in the International Criminal Courts. Does that make sense? Okay.
What happens if like they don't decide to
Show up.
yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing. Think of like you guys might be too young for this. Saddam. What is his name? Hussein. I can't remember his first name. Okay, that was when we went into Iraq and we basically got all the people and they pulled down the statue. It was this huge thing. Okay, they couldn't find him for years. So there's basically like a manhunt where they're in hiding. Same thing with who was the terrorist behind 9/11? Osama bin Laden. Okay, he was being held he was wanted in the International Criminal Court, but he didn't show up. So it was like this massive hunt for decades, right? Until they finally found him. All right, go to the next slide. So look at the comic really quick. Take a look at it. Okay. There's gravestones. One says Nanking, 1937, 1938, never again. One says Ukraine, 1932, never again. Armenia, the Holocaust, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur. What do you think the artist's point was behind this comic? What was the point behind it? What is he trying to say? Noah.
Oh, everybody's saying like, let's never do this again, and then another guy's just like, cowabunga, it is.
Yep. So all these things keep happening. I'll get to you in a second, right? Where they're like, never again. And that's actually a phrase that has been used, Aiden Justin, throughout history, right? Where they were like, never again. Here's what we're going to do to stop it. But then it keeps happening. Samantha?
During 9/11, there were multiple planes, and they also tried to poison our water as well.
Mm-hmm.
So was that technically an attempt at genocide?
I don't know what they would categorize. I think that would just be a terror plot because the intention is to invoke fear and invoke terror rather than to slaughter an entire.
Right.
And it wasn't
There's also the poison of the water.
I don't know. You could research it and let me know. I'm not sure though, but I think it would just be labeled as a potential terror plot.
another thing, like they weren't specifically targeting American people. Like there was other ethnicities besides American people in those towers. So I mean,
Well, a lot of it's Western culture, right? They're trying to eradicate Western culture. So this is an issue, right, that we're kind of faced with is we can all agree, like, this is terrible, right? The things that happen throughout history. I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing about it, especially through me and through Mr. Bold. It's constant talking about negative things, right? But what I want you guys to get out of it, think of Kaffir Boy, right? The hope at the end. What can we do to stop it? So in your final project, that's also going to be one of the things you're going to tackle, okay? What kind of things can we do? So, for example, when Obama was in the White House, he started a board that dealt specifically with genocide and tackled ways to stop it and what to do if we had to intervene as a country. So you guys are going to think about things like that. What can we do as people, okay? That's the big theme, I think, for me in this English class so far when we read these books, is what can we do to stop things like this? What is our role, okay? So think about that as we get through this book. So, go to the next slide. So the Convention on the Prevention of Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, again, was held in 1948. This map, take a look at the map, okay? Every country that is not in purple signed the convention, okay? So basically even Russia is included in it. The only countries that really aren't are in Africa, probably because they're at detrimental civil war with each other. You have areas in Southeast Asia that did not sign it. North Korea obviously did not sign it. There's a country in northern South America that did not sign it. Okay, so this is basically an international community that came together that said, okay, we're going to fight this. However, several of these countries have broken that promise. Okay, so What we're going to do now is we are going to read the back. So go to flip your paper over that I gave you. All right. So this is the actual wording document that was drafted in the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Okay. There are a couple more articles in the convention. We're only going to read these ones to get the main gist. So it's pretty simple too, which is interesting for such a complex topic. So follow along as I read. Adopted by Resolution 260A of the United States General Assembly on the 9th of December 1948. So this is the preamble. The contracting parties, having considered the declaration made by the General Assembly of the United Nations in its Resolution 96I dated 11 December 1946 that genocide is a crime under international law contrary to the spirit and aims of the United Nations and condemned by the civilized world. Recognizing that all periods of history, genocide has inflicted great losses on humanity, and being convinced that in order to liberate mankind from such odious scourge, international cooperation is required. Therefore, hereby agree as hereinafter provided. So this was Article 1. The contracting parties confirm that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law which they undertake to prevent and punish. Okay? So it doesn't matter if it's in war or it's out of war. Genocide is punishable by law. Yes?
Can I get lawyers?
Oh, there are. So, greatest example, everyone knows George Clooney, at least the ladies in here can. His wife, Amal Clooney, is a human rights international lawyer. So they have lawyers that specialize in this kind of stuff.
Like, what if I always wonder this, what if the lawyer, like, doesn't want to pick up your case because it's so bad? Like,
They don't have to.
Wants to pick it up.
They don't have to.
What happens then? They just assign, or is it still the same rights like you always have?
I don't think so. I don't think so that it's the same laws, because that's the United States and this is criminal. Or, sorry, yeah, this is international, so I'm not sure. But, yeah.
Can you be your own lawyer?
Yeah, you can in the United States at least, and I'm sure you can in this, because they're not trying to give you the best chance. Yeah.
Is Germany like part of the United Nations?
I believe so. Do you remember that, mister? They signed it, at least. Well, they had to, right?
Yeah.
They had to, because they were
Well, their army
defeated.
had already been disbanded, and then
Yeah.
it was like,
Listen, I'm pretty sure originally when like the United Nations like met up to talk about what happened, like they blamed Germany for it without like them being there, and that's why they started World War II.
So after World War I, right,
Yeah,
they
after
punished
World War
Germany to the point where everyone was starving, and that's kind of what led to Hitler's
I don't
rise.
think that Germany was part of the United Nations at the
I think they are now, though.
Yeah, they are
think
now.
they are now.
If you were to start.
All right, Article 2. Get back to focusing, okay? Article 2. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group such as, okay? So it's only one of these. It does not have to be all. A, killing members of the group. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Okay? Any of those things are punishable as genocide in the International Criminal Court. Article 3. The following acts shall be punishable. So, genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and complicity in genocide. Okay? That's a big thing. We got complicity. Okay? How many of those German soldiers were just complicit? Do you guys know what that means, complicit?
Yeah.
It means you go along with it. You comply. Okay? So, for example, there's, in the law, right, if you, how do I say this without getting in trouble? That's the hard part. Okay? So, for example, I'm thinking of like criminal court. So, like, if you commit a murder or something like that, and someone knows about it, and they don't report you, they're an accomplice. Here's my lawyer over here. Should have asked her. You're complicit in the murder. Okay? So, just because you didn't necessarily do it, you didn't do anything to stop it. You were complicit.
obstructing justice.
There you go. Sandhurst, she's getting hot over here. Okay? Article 5, last one. Persons committing genocide or any of the other acts enumerated in Article 3 shall be punished, whether they are constitutionally responsible rulers, public officials, or private individuals. Okay? So, that's a whole bunch of legal jargon that doesn't necessarily make sense. So click next just once. So think, pair, share. Huh? Oh, okay. How many people must be killed in order for an event to be genocide? I want you to think about it and talk about it with your neighbor for a couple seconds, okay? How many people have to die in order for it to be labeled a genocide? Think about it. Think about it. Talk. Go ahead.
You can't, like, yeah, exactly. You have to, it has action.
All right, bring it back in 3, 2, 1, 0. I want to hear what you thought. How many people have to die in order for it to be labeled a genocide? No one. What did your group say? No one. Why do you say no one?
Because it says in Article 2 that the President Convention genocide means any of the following acts committed, and one of them just says causing seriously bodily or mental harm. It doesn't necessarily say that they have to kill someone for it to be considered.
Yep. Or even forcibly transferring children, right? So how many genocides have happened in the world that have not been labeled a genocide or have not been taken action against? Probably a lot. Okay. Next, I want you guys to look at B under Article 2. It says genocide is causing serious bodily or mentally harm to members of the group. Okay, so I want you guys to think about it. What is serious mental harm? What does that mean? What is an example? What is serious mental harm? Think about it. Okay, talk with your neighbors. What do you think? What is serious mental harm? All right, bring it back in 3, 2, 1, 0. What did we say? What did we think, Janessa?
I think it's just like psychological torture, like isolating people to the point like where they want to die.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone agree or disagree? Kiara?
That more like when someone's like really like terrified every day for their lives.
That's serious mental harm. Okay, Erica?
Something traumatic that allows them not to function anymore.
So the inability to function. Okay, Lily?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like having to see something that little kids shouldn't have to see.
Definitely. Anyone else?
PTSD.
PTSD. So, all right. So here's one thing I want you to think about. Is it very clear as to what serious mental harm is? You guys all have different definitions, right? Technically, well, does it have to be PTSD to be diagnosed? Do you have to? Is it just isolation? So it's not very clear. Okay, is it torture? Possibly. Because what is serious mental harm? That's not very clear. They didn't do a very good job of outlining that. All right. Number 3. Think. Define conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. Okay, so it also says in letter C of Article 2, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Think about it. What the heck does that mean? Okay. Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it.
Right, like starvation.
Everyone gets sent out of the class.
All right, back in 3, 2, 1, 0. Shh. All right, let me hear. What does that mean? Define that little statement there, Hannah.
Well, we said like naming them, like cutting off their limbs, whatever that might be.
Oh.
We also said castration and sterilization because they did that to the Jews.
And also, if you go back in history, I believe it was the Aztecs when the Spanish came, they would cut off 1 foot of the men so they could not run away. Samantha?
We thought like blocking off main resource like food or water.
Because you're not directly killing them, but how can they live without food or water? Okay, what else? What else? No, was your hand up? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, just kind of making it like hell on earth for everyday life, basically.
So almost like death is inevitable, right? By making it so terrible. Kiara?
I thought about like the tribal reserves, like in like the Capra Boys, like they would send them there, and it's basically just like nothing there, so they can't live.
And they almost inflict war on each other, right?
Even apartheid,
Apartheid.
because they basically just like rely on the teams killing each other in gang violence.
So, according to these principles, was apartheid a genocide?
Yes.
But was it labeled a genocide? Did the UN ever step in?
No,
In fact, they just removed any sort of connection to South Africa and left them to figure it out on their own,
that's not.
right? Juliana?
What about, not that I'm justifying the Holocaust,
Mhm.
just clarifying, but
You're just.
couldn't Germany say that a genocide was occurring for them
How so?
after World War I, before World War II?
Because of what the group of powers did to them?
Yeah.
According to these standards, you could say that because they did cut off their supplies of food and water and their ability to do that. However, genocide wasn't a thing yet.
Yeah.
So, Kiara?
Like causing people to like flee and then not letting them over the borders, so they have to live like on the side of the border with like.
Did you guys hear what Kiara just said? Do I need to take it? Put it away, I don't want to see it again. Yeah.
Like,
Repeat the water.
so like if they have to flee their homes and then they go to the border but they can't get across the border, so they have to like survive on the side of the border where there's not like.
That is exactly what is happening in Myanmar right now with Rohingya, which is a small group of a Muslim religion. Okay? Myanmar basically kicked them out. They basically raided all their houses. They didn't want them. They wanted an ethnic cleansing. They felt that subgroup was not at the same level as the rest of the groups in Myanmar, so they wanted them out. So they're basically traveling in a group on their own, but no one wants them. Okay? And so what's also happening is the military groups are coming in and slaughtering them in different groups. So, has the UN done anything yet? No, it's been happening since like 2015.
Why don't they do it?
Huh?
Why don't they just do it?
Why does who do it?
The UN. Why don't they just do
I
something?
don't know. I'm not part of the UN. Okay? There's all these political things that go on, right? Same thing with, for example, here's a good example, okay? The Armenian genocide in the early 1900s, it was never labeled a genocide and has never been accurately called a genocide, and Obama ran on his candidacy that he would officially make the Armenian genocide a genocide, and he never said the word genocide after he was elected. He would always say the Armenian massacre or something like that. So why would he never label it a genocide? You now have international relations you have to deal with, right? So it's easy to say when you're not president, but once you're president, it's a little bit more difficult to not have to ruin relationships and things like that. So a lot of it is very political. In fact, of why nothing's being done so far.
Trump just takes it to Twitter.
Trump just what?
Trump just takes it to Twitter.
Sometimes I wonder how they allow him to have a Twitter. Why? So, next thing I want you guys to think about one more. Okay, this one's the most important because this is why a lot of things are not done quickly. Okay, what kinds of problems could arise from the language and wording? What kind of problems could arise? Think about it. Think of the wording. Okay, is it very clear? Is it blunt? What problems could arise? Okay, talk about it really quick with your groups or your neighbors.
People wouldn't know what they want.
Yeah.
try to make a hole.
I think one person ever.
Just like, you don't try to break the paper. I can't do it.
All right, 3, 2, 1, 0. What are some issues that could arise, Noah?
I have another piece of paper.
Maybe. What issues could arise, Alex? It's not specific enough. Give me a specific, like where it's not specific. In any of it, right? For example, when it says, what is mental harm? What is bodily harm? Is that torture? Is torture genocide? According to this, it could be. Okay? So when the U.S. decided waterboarding was torture, were we committing genocide as a country? When that was illegal? According to that, could it be? Yeah, serious bodily harm. Do you see where it's not straightforward? Yeah.
If like it isn't straightforward enough, then the groups who are actually committing genocide, they'll find like ways around it to get out of being punished. So then, you know, other groups will be like, oh, you know, we can get out of this too. We don't have to suffer the consequences. So it'll just keep happening over again.
So the cycle keeps repeating. Yes.
Throughout the civil rights movement, couldn't that have been considered genocide?
Okay, I was going to bring this up. Did you hear what Juliana said? Justin, what did Juliana say?
I'm not sure.
Okay, probably should listen. Say it
Throughout
again.
the civil rights movement, couldn't that have been considered genocide?
There were actually 3 African American. It was W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a poet. Okay, there were 3 men who brought a petition to the UN, like a 400-page petition, that African Americans were under genocide in early America. Okay, and they basically just did it as a political statement to be like, according to this, we are being slaughtered. Basically, we are under genocide. Okay, think of throughout history, lynching, things like that. Was that genocide? According to this. Okay. Again, how confusing is this wording? It's not clear, and it hasn't been updated since 1948. All right. Yeah.
I don't like how they had to like specify like what groups, because I feel like it can be literally anyone.
Well, they didn't. They just said.
Like I feel like it doesn't have to be like a national, ethnic, or like religious.
Religious. Well, what other kind of group would it be?
Like I feel like if someone just wanted to like kill anyone with like blue eyes, they could just do it. And that would, like,
But would that fall under a national group? I don't know. So it needs to be more clear there. Okay. So do you guys see where the issues of this could take place? Okay. So here's what we're going to do next. So according to researchers, historians, there are 10 stages to genocide. So if you look at every genocide in history, it developed in 10 separate stages. There used to be 8, and he added in 2, the guy who theorized all this. Okay, so if you look around the room, there are posters that look like this. There are posters that look like that. Okay, so there's one in the back there. There are 10. I want you guys to go around the room and try to put them in the order that you believe that they would develop, 1 to 10. Okay, so what is the first stage of a genocide developing, and what is the last stage? I'm going to give you guys about 10 minutes. Go ahead and get up the room, and on that orange paper, write down the order you think they go in.
wait, can we write down the names first?
Yeah.
How do we know which one's which? Oh my gosh, hey Liz. How you
Hi.
doing?
Good.
Good. That was good. Okay.
I'm gonna write them down.
I'm tired too. I woke up at 7.
Bro, I woke up at 7:10.
How?
Like I basically woke up at 6:20. Then I went back to sleep.
Oh yeah, that's happened to me. I set the alarm and I'm like, you know what?
I do that every day. I set like 5 alarms from like 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, and then I just like wake up.
So there's one on the window back here as well. There's one on the cabinets. There's one in the very back left.
Wait, why are you writing them all
Wait, so do we write these numbers?
down? You're a genius.
Or do we write these numbers?
That's so loud.
Is there 2 denials?
How do we like put them down? Oh, like he's got that.
Oh no.
Extermination. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Extermination is probably like the little stuff.
Discrimination.
Look at the descriptions too, it'll help you. Can you hand me that one, Dale? That's pretty. Oh, I've done it. Oh, not that one, sorry. There's 2 denials you guys said. I added one right here because I forgot one and put 2 denials. Just FYI. So I just added one back over there. Oh, okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4 right there. 5. There's one in the back next to the cabinet. So there's one in the cabinet. There's one in the back by the printer. And there's one in the left. Yeah, this did.
Oh, I didn't see preparation. Go for it.
No, it's a frog going like this. Hyper.
Oh, nice! What's happening, girl? Sting bug.
Yeah, I have the answer.
It's not the answer.
Yes, it is.
That's your word.
No.
You want my number?
Wait a minute.
You didn't give me your number.
My name is, what's that? No, my number is. You need to let it.
Hey, Bayla, can you tell me what that says? No.
I didn't think.
Why are all of your assets?
No.
Why are you looking? Because his face is so weird.
Why are you acting so bad?
Oh, yeah.
Did you finish all of them?
Oh.
It says, what do you want to do? How you discern between right and wrong?
Oh, that's like healthy.
You guys have a minute and a half.
We have like 2 minutes.
Take a minute and a half.
Like, No, but it's not. It's not in the way.
Okay, so try to go over.
What about preparation?
Oh yeah, I forgot about preparation. Wait, we have to organize it.
And
Then class.
Yeah, but dehumanize after you're organizing, classifying, all that stuff.
I'm loving the discussion.
Yes, we need more time.
Didn't we?
Wait, what about number 2, 3, 4? Wait, here, read them out.
One is organized. Symbolization.
Wait, don't you have to discriminate when dehumanize? Because you have to be like, F you before you go in like
Correct. And symbolization. And then this polarization. Yeah. And then persecution. And then
wait, we forgot about this.
All right. Bring it in 3, 2, 1, 0. What do we think is the first stage? What do we think is the first stage, Justin? Classification. It's the discernment between us and them, right? It's the categorization of making someone less than. Okay, what do you guys think is stage 2? Hold on, I'm getting a phone call. Stage 2, what is it? It is symbolization, okay? So we give names or symbols to the classifications of ethnicity, race, or nationality. Like we made the, not we, I'm sorry. Germany made the Jews wear the star, right? To identify them. What do you guys think is the third? What did we put for 3? Haley, what did you put for 3, hon? Discrimination, okay? So a dominant group uses some sort of power to deny the rights of another group, right? So there's that discrimination of we have more power than you because of this, this, or this. Number 4, what do you guys think that was? Lily, what'd you put?
Polarization.
It's not polarization, Ryan?
It's dehumanization.
It is dehumanization, okay? So dehumanization is when one group treats another group as second-class citizens. Members may be compared with animals, parasites, insects, or diseases. This is when, if you look at everything through history, right, they make some sort of reason. Whether it was African Americans had smaller brains, so we can treat them this way, right? That was an actual published study, which was absolutely inaccurate, right? But that made it okay for slavery to exist. So things like that, the dehumanization happens. What do you guys think number 5 is? Number 5. Riley Pratt, what'd you put? Close, but not that one. Samantha? Nope. Noah? Organization is number 5, okay? So this is, because genocide is always organized. So before some major terrible stuff happens, there's some sort of organization, okay?
That's number 5.
Yes. Special army units or militias are often trained and armed. Plans are made for genocidal killings. So remember, even the planning is classified as genocide in international courts. What do you guys think number 6 is? No? Polarization, okay? Polarization is 6.
Legally, you can go to like stage 4 and be okay.
No, I'm saying that very clear of we're planning for a genocide. That was still one of the things that was very clear. Okay, this isn't like how you plan a genocide. This is the stages of how it actually develops. All right, number 7. Number 7. What do we think? Sophia, what'd you put? That is preparation. Okay, so national or other perpetrator groups lead to the final solution. So think of what the final solution was for the Jews, right? It was a full cleansing. What did we put for 8? Justin? Persecution. Victims are identified and separated because of some identity. Death lists are drawn up. Alright. Number 9. Braden, what'd you put? Extermination, okay? That's when the mass killing. That's when the very clear genocide, right? When the killing begins. And number 10, Leanna? Denial. Every single genocide has a denial component. Think of, we talked about this the other day, right? We have people running for Senate who are running on Holocaust denial. They run on the fact that it was an orchestrated thing that occurred so that we would do some sort of, we become communist or something, okay? There are people who actually receive thousands of votes based on the fact that they're Holocaust deniers. The Armenian genocide, it's still not called a genocide. It's called a massacre, right? Your hands up. What were you thinking? Okay. Does that make sense? There's always a denial by the people who participated. Yes.
It was on this slide the whole time.
Yeah.
Wait,
You're
what?
welcome. The next slide was the answers.
Oh, we could have cheated.
Well, because I wasn't going to give it to you. I was going to, yeah, genocide.
So I have a question. So in China right now, there's this big issue with this Muslim group, which the Chinese government believes are like Islamic terrorists.
Okay.
And so they're putting these people in these facilities to be politically active. And the people who have survived it said that they're like being tortured in there.
Okay.
And stuff like that, and like, you know, a lot of medical torture as well.
Yeah.
Could that be considered
Yeah.
genocide?
Even North Korea, right? They imprison entire families if someone does something, like the generations to come.
No, I got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, don't read that now. We're supposed to read that. I'm gonna cut it out.
No, you're good. Thank you. Do you want a hard copy?
Yeah, I feel like it's
This one came out to get signed.
I liked writing
Alright, so, okay, the last thing we're going to do, okay, we're going to read the preface. So, I want you guys to turn to this page. It's 7 in Roman numerals, I think. Please close all computers. Please close all computers. What's that? Oh, I have it.
Are you gonna want us to?
No, you can keep it. So you have it. Give me a second. Please hurry up. I don't know. I'm gonna look at it, but they basically say that it didn't happen or it didn't happen that way.
Most don't get support in this country if you run on Holocaust supporting your basically.
One guy in the South got like 14,000 votes in the 2018 elections.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that run on Holocaust now. Think of the neo-Nazi movement that's happening right now. The video is showing you on Monday, right? Kiara?
It's okay, Americans do.
Your teacher didn't go over what night means with you? Oh my gosh.
That's appalling.
I need to go beat her up.
Oh,
Okay.
are you assuming?
I can do that.
Yes! We'll get into it. I'm going to teach you that. Alright, so. Okay. So, the preface is extremely important to understanding this book. As we read this book, I want you guys to really understand that this kid is younger than you, and the things you're going to experience in this book should not happen to any child in any way, shape, or form. Okay? This is, in his preface, he is explaining why he wrote this book. Okay? So follow along as I read. If in my lifetime I was to write only one book, this would be the one. Just as the past lingers in the present, all my writings after night, Ryan, including those that deal with biblical, Talmudic, or Hasidic themes, profoundly bear its stamp and cannot be understood if one has not read this very first of my works. Why did I write it? Did I write it so as not to go mad, or on the contrary, to go kill mad in order to understand the nature of madness, the immense, terrifying madness that had erupted in history and in the conscience of mankind? Was it to leave behind a legacy of words, of memories to help prevent history from repeating itself? Or was it simply to preserve a record of the ordeal I endured as an adolescent, at an age when one's knowledge of death and evil should be limited to what one discovers in literature? There are those who tell me that I survived in order to write this text. I am not convinced. I don't know how I survived. I was weak, rather shy. I did nothing to save myself. A miracle? Certainly not. If heaven could or would perform a miracle for me, why not for others more deserving than myself? It was nothing more than chance. However, being survived, I needed to give some meaning to my survival. Was it to protect that meaning that I set to paper an experience in which nothing made sense? In retrospect, I must confess that I do not know, or no longer know, what I wanted to achieve with my words. I only know that without this testimony, my life as a writer, or my life period, would not have become what it is, that of a witness who believes he has a moral obligation to try to prevent the enemy from enjoying one last victory by allowing his crimes to be erased from human memory. For today, thanks to recently discovered documents, the evidence shows that in the early days of their accession to power, the Nazis in Germany set out to build a society in which there simply would be no room for Jews. Toward the end of their reign, their goal changed. They decided to leave behind a world in ruins in which Jews would seem never to have existed. That is why everywhere in Russia, in the Ukraine, and in Lithuania, the Einsatzgruppen carried out the final solution by turning their machine guns on more than 1 million Jews, men, women, and children, and throwing them into huge mass graves dug just moments before by the victims themselves. Special units would then disinter the corpses and burn them. Thus, for the first time in history, Jews were not only killed twice, but denied burial in a cemetery. It is obvious that the war which Hitler and his accomplices waged was a war not only against Jewish men, women, and children, but also against Jewish religion, Jewish culture, Jewish tradition, therefore Jewish memory. Convinced that this period in history would be judged one day, I knew that I must bear witness. I also knew that while I had many things to say, I did not have the words to say them. Painfully aware of my limitations, I watched helplessly as language became an obstacle. It became clear that it would be necessary to invent a new language, but how was one to rehabilitate and transform words betrayed and perverted by the enemy? Hunger, thirst, fear, transport, selection, fire, chimney. These words all have intrinsic meaning, but in those times, they meant something else. Writing in my mother tongue at that point close to extinction, I would pause at every sentence and start over and over again. I would conjure up other verbs, other images, other silent cries. It still was not right. But what exactly was it? It was something elusive, darkly shrouded for fear of being usurped, profaned. All the dictionary had to offer seemed meager, pale, lifeless. Was there a way to describe the last journey in sealed cattle cars, the last voyage toward the unknown, or the discovery of a demented and glacial universe where to be inhuman was human, where disciplined, educated men in uniform came to kill and innocent children and weary old men came to die, or the countless separations on a single fiery night, the tearing apart of entire families, entire communities, or, incredibly, the vanishing of a beautiful, well-behaved little Jewish girl with golden hair and a sad smile, murdered with her mother the very night of their arrival. How was one to speak of them without trembling and a heart broken for all eternity? Deep down, the witness knew then, as he does now, that his testimony would not be received. After all, it deals with an event that sprang from the darkest zone of man. Only those who experienced Auschwitz know what it was. Others will never know. But would they at least understand? Could men and women who consider it normal to assist the weak, to heal the sick, to protect small children, and to respect the wisdom of their elders understand what happened there? Would they be able to comprehend how, within that cursed universe, the masters tortured the weak and massacred the children, the sick, and the old? And yet, having lived through this experience, one could not keep silent no matter how difficult, if not impossible, it was to speak. And so I persevered, and trusted the silence that envelops and transcends words, knowing all the while that any one of the fields of ashes in Birkenau carries more weight than all the testimonies about Birkenau. For despite all my attempts to articulate the unspeakable, it is still not right. Is that why my manuscript, written in Yiddish as "And the World Remains Silent," and translated first into French, then into English, was rejected by every major publisher, French and American, despite the tireless efforts of the great Catholic French writer and Nobel laureate Francois Mauriac? After months and months of personal visits, letters, and telephone calls, he finally succeeded in getting it to print. Though I made numerous cuts, the original Yiddish version still was long. Jerome Linden, the legendary head of the small but prestigious editions, I'm not going to get French here, Des Minutes, edited and further cut the French version. I accepted his decision because I worried that some things might be presence alone mattered. I was more afraid of having said too much than too little. Example, in the Yiddish version, the narrative opens with these cynical musings. In the beginning there was faith, which is childish, trust, which is vain, and illusion, which is dangerous. We believed in God, trusted in man, and lived with the illusion that every one of us has been entrusted with a sacred spark from the Shekinah's flame, that every one of us carries in his eyes and in his soul a reflection of God's image. That was the source, if not the cause, of all our ordeals. Other passages from the original Yiddish text have more on the death of my father and on the liberation. Why not include those in this new translation? Too personal, too private, perhaps they need to remain between the lines. And yet, I remember that night, the most horrendous of my life. Eliezer, my son, come here. I want to tell you something. Only to you. Come, don't leave me alone, Eliezer. I heard his voice, grasped the meaning of his words and the tragic dimension of the moment, yet I did not move. It had been his last wish to have me next to him in his agony, at the moment when his soul was tearing itself from his lacerated body. Yet I did not let him have his wish. I was afraid of the blows. That was why I remained deaf to his cries. Instead of sacrificing my miserable life and rushing to his side, taking his hand, reassuring him, showing him that he was not abandoned, that I was near him, that I felt his sorrow, instead of all of that, I remained flat on my back, asking God to make my father stop calling my name, to make him stop crying, so afraid was I to incur the wrath of the SS. In fact, my father was no longer conscious. Yet his plaintive, harrowing voice went on piercing the silence and calling me, nobody but me. Well, the SS had flown into a rage and was striking my father on the head. Be quiet, old man, be quiet. My father no longer felt the club's blows. I did, and yet I did not react. I let the SS beat my father. I left him alone in the clutches of death. Worse, I was angry with him for having been noisy, for having cried, for provoking the wrath of the SS. Eliezer, Eliezer, come, don't leave me alone. His voice had reached from so far away, from so close, but I had not moved. I shall never forgive myself, nor shall I forgive the world for having pushed me against the wall, for having turned me into a stranger, for having awakened in me the basest, most primitive instincts. His last word had been my name, a summons, and I had not responded. Yeah. So, you guys have, there's 3 more pages in the preface, like literally. I want you guys to finish it tonight. I think it is so important to understanding why he wrote this and understanding it as a whole piece of literature, okay? We'll start reading the actual book tomorrow. You can keep those. I need to give you guys a resource guide as you leave. It'll help you understand any Jewish terms that you do not know.
Do you want us to turn this in?
No,
Hey,
keep it for you.
Is that our only homework, to read the preface?
Yeah. Preface.
It's
Sounds like yeah. Actually, probably not. I got yeah, that's true. But it's just 3 pages. Okay.
So I say the all these backwards, you'll figure it out. Okay.
oh yeah, go for it.
I will vote you up on this.
Slow.
Bruh.
You're slow. I'm slow.
Bruh.
Your mom told you to give us
I just turned it in just so you
Yo.
So I say both backwards.
Where's all the tomato sauce? No, you
I was like, Charles, what's the name of this? He's like, I don't even know. I was like,
FaceTime me. Like when you FaceTime me, it's like one of the worst times possible. So there's like, we had like a loose pig running around the fairground, and we were trying to shove a lamb up in this giant popper in the bed of the truck. Yeah, a sheep. Well, it was a sheep. You're trying to throw the sheep up, and then there's a pig running around, and then you're like, can I FaceTime you? And then I was gonna say maybe, and then you FaceTime me, and I was like, hey. I'm carrying like I have like hay in my hands too. My hands are like full of hay and stuff. I was like,
They're like wrapping a goat by the neck.
So think about that. So you actually you begin working together. No. Yeah. Give me some whatever you think. Is there a class in the morning? Oh, it's right. Class.
I think the best thing about this is that we have no other students.
Whose computer is up here?
So we have to read a crap ton.
Hey,
I hate reading.
I read 6 chapters of the book last night, and I'm like even more confused now than I was
Okay,
when I started.
Ms. Widowski, I have to file a complaint for my entire group. So,
I'm not even gonna let you finish.
phone in the classroom. Phone in the classroom.
Okay, what's your name?
okay, so tomorrow's assignment is on Thursday. It's the Google Doc thing, and it says it's due tomorrow 8 a.m. and my whole group is
No. That's not what's due tomorrow.
I know
That's
it
not
isn't,
what's due
but it
tomorrow.
says it. It says it, and it also
I actually believe you now that I think about it.
And so today's assignment is due on